The Literary City with Ramjee Chandran, exclusively on IndigoMusic.com.
Hello, I'm Ramjee Chandran and welcome to the Literary City podcast on IndigoMusic.com. My guest today is the delightful author Shrabani Basu, joining me from her home in London. We talk about Queen Victoria and her close companion, Abdul. You might remember that her book was turned into a major movie titled Victoria and Abdul. And we discuss her latest book, The Mystery of the Parsi Lawyer, about how Arthur Conan Doyle played his character Sherlock Holmes in real life and helped to exonerate this Parsi lawyer who didn't commit the crime. It's all quite the story.
They arrested him on the morning of 18th August. George Idalji had been on his way to work as usual, wearing a light three-piece check suit and a smart straw boater. He was waiting to catch the 8:45 train to Birmingham when a local police constable came up to him and said he was wanted at Cannock Police Station. Inspector Campbell had asked to see them. He asked what it was about. The policeman said he did not know. Somewhere on the platform, George heard a man say that a horse had been killed. He told the constable that he had important work in his office and would call on the inspector later. The constable asked him if he could not take a holiday for a day. He shook his head and turned his face away. Later, they said he had been smiling. He said he had smiled at something else. That morning, the police called at his house in the village of Worley and interviewed his father, the Reverend Shapurji Idalji, and his mother, Charlotte. They removed a coat, a waistcoat, and a pair of shoes. Then they called at George's office in Birmingham. The coat had bloodstains, they told him. The shoes were muddy. Could he see the coat? He asked. No, they said. They had left it at the police station as they could not carry it so far. They described the coat, asked him if he had worn it the night before. He said he had not. It was an old coat that he used only in the house and in the grounds. They told him they had found horse hairs on it. He said he may have picked them up while leaning on a fence. Soon after, they arrested him on the charge of mutilating and killing a horse in Great Worley in fields half a mile from the vicarage. He denied the charge, saying he had not left the house that night. By afternoon, he was in a cold, white-tiled cell in the lockup in Steelhouse Lane, where members of the notorious Birmingham gang, the Peaky Blinders, would soon be imprisoned. He, George Edward Thompson Idalji, 28, a solicitor of Newhall Street, Birmingham, the son of an Indian vicar and an English mother, was a prisoner of His Majesty's government.
Not too many years ago in New York City, I went to watch a movie that anyone intelligent was talking about, Victoria and Abdul. It is the story of how Abdul Karim, a servant of Queen Victoria, the Queen of England at the time, came to become her closest confidant. It's a touching tale. After the movie, in the theater's foyer, I overheard one woman asking her friend in a most puzzled tone, "Is that what that museum in London is called? Victoria and Abdul?" "No, dear," her friend replied, and set her straight on the correct name. "It's Victoria and Albert Museum, dear." The title of the movie is based on the book of the same name by my guest today, author, journalist, and historian Shrabani Basu. Shrabani has the almost uncanny ability to find a story where others did not, and then spend years researching and writing it. Such as the story about a Parsi lawyer in pre-World War I England, George Idalji, who was accused and convicted of murdering horses. Now, all of us at some point have lived in 221 Baker Street in our hearts and minds. It's where Sherlock Holmes lived. We know that Arthur Conan Doyle created Sherlock Holmes and wrote those magnificent mysteries, but Not many of us know that there were only two occasions when Conan Doyle could actually play Sherlock Holmes. One was that of Oscar Slater, who was a gambling den operator who was convicted of bludgeoning an 82-year-old woman. Conan Doyle's curiosity was piqued because of inconsistencies that he found in the case. He wound up paying for most of Slater's successful appeal 20 years later. The earlier and more famous case was that of George Idalgi. Now, when he was in prison, Idalgi read a lot of Sherlock Holmes mysteries, and then when he was released ahead of time, he wanted his name cleared, so he wrote to Arthur Conan Doyle and asked for help. Conan Doyle got involved, and despite the efforts of the local constabulary, had him exonerated. Shrabani Basu's book, The Mystery of the Parsi Lawyer, is a book that not only clears George Idalgi's name in public and historical opinion, but it is a cannot-put-down thriller, more so because it's a real-life Sherlock Holmes thriller. And now back to the lovebirds, Victoria and Abdul, and setting aside my pretensions of not being interested in muckrake and scuttlebutt, I'd like to know how close Victoria was to Abdul. I mean, how close, really? To that end, let's ask the author. Shrabani Basu, welcome to the Literary City.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Ramji.
Entirely my pleasure. Right, now Victoria and Abdul. Now that would be a rather unlikely name for a law firm, wouldn't it?
It was a little cheeky twist on Victoria and Albert Museum, which is always written as VNA, and
That's funny. All right, now let's not waste any more time and let's get straight to the hot goss. Victoria and Abdul, did they or didn't they?
No. I mean, well, of course, I wasn't there under the bed, but it's impossible that they would have, because that's not the relationship. The relationship is multi-layered, is the way I see it. It's and this is through the letters and what I see from their interactions. Sometimes she signs a letter, your loving mother. Sometimes it's your close friend. Sometimes it's just VRI and then all written in Urdu with crosses for kisses. So it's going between a friend, a confidant, sometimes a son. And Victoria is quite interesting because when Albert dies, her beloved husband, she writes in her journals that she feels she has lost a husband, a friend, a father, and even a mother. So, that's how complicated and complex relationships can be. And I think this was one of those complicated and, multi-layered relationships. But there was a physical element, there were two men who came, and one was, she describes Muhammad Baksh as short and smiling, and she describes Abdul Karim as fine with a fair countenance. Immediately he's the one.
Now, you found out about Abdul Karim when you were researching a book on Indian curries.
Mm-hmm.
You were a good cook.
Oh, sort of. Possible. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy feeding friends, trying new things. Let's put it that way.
So, how did you find Abdul Karim?
So the curry book is a history of curry. As a historian, I wanted to research, going back to the East India Company when they went searching for spices. So it looks at it over centuries. And I knew that Queen Victoria loved her curries and that she had two Indian servants who cooked them for her. And that's all I knew when I went to Osborne House and saw these portraits of, this man, Abdul Karim, painted in red and gold. And, the photographs are in the book. And he's holding a book. And it struck me that he doesn't look like a servant. He's been painted like a Nawab, like a nobleman.
Cool.
And then I saw more of his photographs, more of his, portraits, busts. And then the clincher was when I went to Queen Victoria's bedroom. And so above her bed, and the bedroom has been left, and this is in Osborne House where she died.
Right.
The bedroom has been left exactly as it was when she died there. So when she died, her bed has a photograph of her favorite, Albert, above her bed. And there is a dressing area, which is sort of adjacent to the bedroom. And there near her dressing table were two photographs. So the top one was John Brown.
Oh, yes.
He was a Scottish gillie with whom she had a relationship. He brought her out of mourning.
Right.
And below John Brown was Abdul Karim,
Okay.
sitting, looking very dapper. And I said, okay, I need to know more about this guy. And that's really how it started.
How does it work? Do you simply show up at Windsor Castle one day, knock on the door and say, "May I see your secrets, please"?
No, of course not. You have to write to the archivist. I had to prove that I wasn't just I wrote in my letter. I'd already done a book by then. I'd written Spy Princess about Noor Inayat Khan. So, I ticked the box with a very respectable book. I wasn't a sleazy, Sun tabloid reporter. Well, they allowed me in. That was not a problem. I wanted to see, I was very clear that I'm researching this relation and I'd like to see Queen Victoria's journals. And importantly, I wanted to see Queen Victoria's Hindustani journals. So I thought that there'd be one or two phrase books, with everyday words or something like that. And the archivist wheeled in a trolley with 13 volumes. And she had one for every year that they were together. She never missed a lesson. Each one was a record of their year. So literally in these pages was their personal space. And no Western biographer had ever looked at them. So the blotting paper fell out, 100 years later. There were some in Urdu, but these are lessons. So they are then translated in English. They are written in Roman, so I could read it. And I've grown up in Delhi. I follow Hindi. So Urdu and Hindi, I can understand. And it was brilliant. It was just a treasure trove.
Must have been a challenge to research that story, especially when most of the evidence had been set on fire.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So when I started out and the first thing I learned was that all the letters are written by Queen Victoria to Abdul Karim, and she would write about 5 letters a day. I'm not joking. I've seen some of the letters which survived. They were in Windsor Castle, and I saw them. Some of them, as I said, were signed with crosses for hearts. Some just said, "Just come and say good night to me." He lives, down the road. She just asked him to come and say good night to her. Some were really showed how deeply their relationship was. Pretty intimate. And well, of course, when I started out, I knew that these letters have been burned. So, a major source has gone. But that's why I then said, okay, next stop, go to the top, go see her journals and work it out from there and see. I mean, there are lots of other sources in the book, including those who are outside this relationship. So the household, all the nasty bits, plus the newspapers. I'm a journalist. I know there's going to be stuff. I wanted to see how they are reporting Abdul Karim. They call him the John Brown in their gossip columns. So I had to put it all together from various sources. Took 4 years.
Oh, I believe it. After Victoria dies, the Sun and the Palace Panjandrams jump in and try to erase every record and memory of Abdul Karim. But didn't Victoria secure this man while she was still alive? Or did she?
Well, she did secure him. She got him a large grant in Agra.
Okay.
She knew that they would come land grant in Agra. So actually, Abdul Karim had become part of the landed gentry of Agra. His father, who was just an apothecary in the jail, was given the title of Khan Bahadur, which is, the equivalent of a knighthood. So he was rubbing shoulders. He was invited to the Viceroy's Darbar. He was rubbing shoulders with the nobility. But she could not control what her son Bertie did after that, enter his house and destroy the letters. So that was, but she provided for him financially. So he wasn't poor, when he went back.
So he didn't die broke.
No, I think he just died heartbroken.
Not merely a passing fancy then. She really cared for him.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. She stuck up for him. She got so many brownie points from me because of the way she takes on her household and her son. Yeah. Memos from her. Yeah. She was amazing in that sense.
And now to the mystery of the Parsi lawyer. Did you specifically connect the creation of the appeals court in England to the outcome of the Idalji case?
Absolutely, because in 1907, when this whole saga comes up and Arthur Conan Doyle enters this, champions his cause. There are meetings before that, and George Idalji is left, sort of released from jail, and there are meetings calling for an appeal court to be set up, because this is exactly what campaigners were looking for. So the fact that in 1907, after he's given his free pardon, this appeals court is set up. I mean, there's a direct link.
Did you write this book during the pandemic?
No, it took 5 years to write this book, actually. I started in 2015. So luckily, I had finished all my research. Because again, I did quite a bit of research, as is obvious. So it took me to 4 libraries and finally finished trawling through all the police files in Portsmouth, his letters, everything that could be done. Plus, as a journalist myself, I have to go to the scene of crime. I have to check out the place, get the atmosphere of the place. So all that took a long time because politically there was a lot going on in Britain at the time, Brexit, non-stop elections, etc. So this is with a few pauses. But I finished my research just before the library shut. So that was really lucky. By December of 2019, I had done my research. So I could have the first draft, and then then everything shut. So I wouldn't have been able to complete it. I had my research work. I was just doing the edits after that for a year. Yeah.
To discuss prose for a minute, the second sentence of your prologue reads, "It was a wild and windy night." Tell me honestly, did it take a lot of resolve not to write dark and stormy night?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't start a ghost story with "It was a wild." It actually was. So George Adalji writes that it was a wild night. Arthur Conan Doyle brings it up that he couldn't have crossed these fields because it was stormy night. The fact that his boots are wet is because it has been raining. He stepped into puddles. So there's a lot of reference to this wild and windy night. It wasn't made up. It could have been a clear August night with a full moon. It is true. It is. I should have put it in quotes.
And now, speaking of things that are darker than stormy nights, your descriptions of the racism that the Idaljis had to face back at the time were palpable, almost like you felt it.
I was looking at this, and I was, as I write in my book as well, that I was doing the final edits and writing this, in lockdown when Black Lives Matter just exploded around the world. And so it just made everything so relevant. I was looking at cases in UK at the time. Who was getting stopped and searched when we had a pandemic? Most of all, who was being put behind bars? It was always the Black people, Black nation, always. A Black MP was searched. She's driving a Mercedes in East London. They said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm an MP." So this is the sort of thing that was happening during lockdown. And you realize how relevant this happened. The story happened 100 years ago. But the fact that it's still going on, the fact that the police are, always charged with institutional racism, it comes up over and over again. So there's no escaping that. And well, you take it in your stride because, you write about it. As a writer, you've just got to put it out there. That this is happening.
With so much hate mail, graffiti, poop in a bag, why didn't the Idaljis just pack up and move to someplace a little less racist in England?
Well, that's really interesting. And to me, that is the immigrant experience. So what happened? The first thing that happens is graffiti painted outside the vicarage saying Idaljis are wicked. What does Shapurji Idalji do? He wipes it off. What did all these shopkeepers, we know of all the Asian corner shop owners in the 60s, in the 70s, they had these little corner shops. They were attacked, their windows were broken. It's happening less and less now, but in the 60s, in the 70s, this happened a lot. What did they do? They just went and they mended that window and they got on with their lives. And that is exactly, to me, this is the immigrant experience that Shapurji Idalji, went through. I've talked about curries in that book that I wrote. It's about, the Bangladeshis were the ones who started all these high street curry houses. And what did they face? They had their heads bashed in, serving this late night curry to a lot of drunken yobs. What did they do? Did they give up and go away? No, they just went with it. They laid the foundations of this industry. I mean, they served dreadful food, but the point is that they put it there, it catered to the English palate, whatever it did. It was there. And so they play a sort of important role in the social history of the time. And I see Shapurji as just the same story, same immigrant experience, except he had a fight in him. He did take it up. he had a petition, signed. And George fought as well. George was incredible.
And now, towards the end of the book, you are in this graveyard with your niece hunting for George Idalji's tomb. And it's hot, and you're just about giving up on the task when you chance upon it hidden under some bramble. In my mind's eye, it has you dropping to the ground and weeping with relief. But that's not what you did.
No, it was sheer joy. I wasn't crying. I was at high-fiving with my niece because she was saying, let's go. We can't find this grave. And I said, okay, one more. And then there was this last grave. It was, virtually sunk into the ground. And it was covered with weeds. So there's nothing. So I have a photograph in my book of the bit that I pulled off. And you can see the rest is still covered. And I said, okay, last one. And then suddenly this name emerged, Thompson, and my hopes rose. And then Edward. And, I knew his full name was George Edward Thompson Idalji, and then George at the end and Idalji on the other side. And then it was like, whoopee, we got that. Yeah, in this empty graveyard, both of us just shrieking with delight. There were no tears. I wasn't sobbing.
Very appropriate behavior in a graveyard.
Not for, if anybody had seen a sort of, middle-aged Asian woman shrieking with joy in a graveyard, they would have thought I was cuckoo, but I probably was.
They would have probably said, oh, she didn't like him much. Another book of yours I'd like to touch upon briefly, Spy Princess, about Noor Inayat Khan, the woman who spied for Britain during the Second World War and was a telegraph operator under the most difficult and dangerous circumstances. This was turned into a movie, right, on Amazon Prime. I think it was called A Call to Spy, but she was just a character in that movie.
She's a character in that, yeah. That's right, yeah.
Once again, a fascinating book about a fascinating woman, but you got involved with her life in a much deeper way. You became a crusader for her, and you were instrumental in getting a statue of hers erected in London.
A stamp, a memorial, and a blue plaque. So 3 things. I had a long wish list. Yeah, so I took them all off. And actually the memorial, the idea for a memorial, I'd just written a book, and I had promised her brother that, I would do everything to make sure that her story was told. So after the book was out, I thought it would be by, spreading the knowledge about Noor and doing talks, etc. But my readers wrote to me. I had several readers who said, why isn't there a memorial for her? We love the book. Thank you for bringing her story out. And they, there was a gentleman who said she should be on the 4th plinth. We have a 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, which has a constantly moving sculpture. So every 6 months it's changed. She should be on the 4th plinth. I will write to the Prime Minister every day. And I was saying, my good God, people have really taken her story to heart, and they're very serious. And then I said, well, who's going to do this memorial? It has to be me.
And thus you got into it. Do you get passionate and deeply involved with everybody that you write about?
Not all of them. I mean, yes, Noor Inayat Khan obviously is my heroine. That's blatantly obvious for anyone to see, because I have championed her cause. I wrote the book so many years, it's nearly 20 years, and I still talk about her, write about her, and keep at it. And in fact, the blue plaque was unveiled in 2020, so in the middle of the lockdown. And they asked me, English Heritage asked me to unveil it. So it was quite an honor.
Indeed, it's no trivial thing at all. So, Shrabani, what's next?
I mean, I'm tinkering with various things that I want to do. There's always leads that I want to follow, but we'll see.
A few leads to follow. You sound like you have quite a few stories to tell.
I think there are so many stories to tell.
Well, whenever it is that your next project is released, I'm sure it's worth the wait.
That's very kind of you. Might be a few years. Who knows? Maybe I should write a quickie. Sometimes I feel I should do a quickie. There are people who write books every year. How do they do that?
Neither the faintest nor the foggiest. But this was fun. Shrabani Basu, thank you so much for being my guest today on The Literary City.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here and chat. Take care.
You have been listening to the author Shrabani Basu. What a conversation. I will be back next week on the Literary City podcast with another fabulous guest, the former world chess champion and legend forever, Vishwanathan Anand. Vishy and I actually played a game live online, and there's no points guessing who won. This is Ramjee Chandran. Stay tuned on the always fun, always entertaining IndigoMusic.com.